So why did I actually get into this? So I think the thing was that I wasn't really interested in children. And sometimes I think, where did I end up here? But I was really interested originally in issues of freedom of censorship, issues of freedom of information, censorship issues, media regulation. And I was studying how authoritarian regimes were actually trying to control information flow online. And then after I finished my degree, I got a job at what was then the Norwegian Board of Film Classification as a new media policy advisor. And I discovered that in policy, the same arguments that were used by totalitarian regimes to control information flow in order to protect the public were used by non-authoritarian democracies to say that we have to do the same thing, but this is to protect the children. So I was fascinated, and I could see all of these policy claims coming, and all these claims about media effects, and the claims about what is risky, and why children cannot access media, and why they shouldn't be online. This was early days of the internet, saying that the internet is dangerous for people. We had a ombudsman for children in Norway saying that children shouldn't be online. And I thought, is this really the case? And I couldn't really find anyone who could answer that. So I thought maybe I need to start researching these claims myself. And then I went back to the academic, to the university, and here I am. As an undergraduate and graduate student, I just fell in love with media studies. And one of the things that I love about media studies is that we sort of, it's a young field. So we get to be when it comes to theory, we can be the magpie of the academic world. We can sort of steal and borrow and adapt and adjust from all kinds of fields, depending on what we need. We're not so confined, perhaps, as some of these very old school traditional disciplines. And I love that. I love the fact that we could gain insights into extremely specialized disciplines, and we could see how it fits into our way of thinking. And as a media scholar, for me, it's all about context. So it's not about the individual or about the social or about the family or about the national. It's all about the full context. And that is something that you can do as a media scholar. Yes, so I think as a media scholar, working with children in media, you're always aware that through our tradition has always been to say that children are not subjected to media, but they're active users and they interact. But with the internet, and especially for the past years, I think that this understanding of what it means to interact with media, or what it means not to be a passive user, has sort of exploded. So the interactive element that is also seeing children as creators, as co-producers, as interacting with algorithms and social interaction, it's just something completely different than it used to be when one just researched radio and television or more traditional media. So that's a big change. And I think the other thing that this need for interdisciplinarity and the complexities in the concepts of risks and harm and how seemingly traditionally well-established concepts, like for instance bullying, becomes very complicated when you add cyberbullying, and you have other fields that not just from psychology, but other fields that wants to go in and discuss these concepts. And sometimes we have interdisciplinarity, which is a little bit kicking and screaming, but it's important, and I think we do it more and more, and that's a big change for me, at least. So there's of course always some favorites, the top 3 theories, but I think that my number one helpful theoretical approach is to look at some of these more overarching theories that can help explain seemingly interconnected or not even connected concepts of risk. So my particular favorite, which I find extremely useful, is Ulrich Beck's risk society thesis and all these concepts about late modernity. And it's not the risk part of the risk society theory I like. I like, there's less known and very underused in our field theory of institutionalized individualization. And for me, I think that's extremely helpful, and it's helping to contextualize and to elevate all these use of different theories and concepts across various risks and opportunities and media interactions to a more comprehensive understanding of what is going on a larger level. So yes, that would be my, if I had to just use one theory the rest of my life, that would probably be it. Yeah, I think it's hard because it of course depends on who you ask. But since you ask me, what I find very interesting is that when I came back to the academic world and coming from a place of looking at censorship issues, I find that this discourse on children's rights in terms of access rights and rights to information and right to media access was almost non-existent. I mean, it was there, but it was always sort of underplayed by the argument of, well, if it's to protect children, then it's okay. Never really qualifying if that protection is legitimate or not, or if it's wise or if it's needed. Because who can be against protecting children? So I think that for the past years, we've seen an increase, which is helpful for me because this is what I'm interested in, is an increase in interest in looking at children's rights in a more complex way, that not just the right to protection, but the right to participation. And if we can try to discuss this also in relation to perceived and real media harm, I think that will really can give us some interesting also theoretical and empirical debates moving forward. I think the thing about researchers and about the academic world is that we are the people who we need not to try to censor ourselves. We should let all ideas and information and concepts flow and leave it all on the table, also so that we can address the different perspectives and understand them. And I think importantly, sometimes I can also think that, this is like, why are they using this theory, or why, when there's such other elegant theories that can be used. But then you realize that we perhaps, because we work so interdisciplinary within this media and children field, that maybe we think we understand, or we use the same concepts, or we use the same words, but we don't mean the same thing. So I think the best thing about the academic world is that we really can discuss things. So let's not censor ourselves. Let's just put it all out there, and maybe we can even be inspired to create something new. I guess I try to do what I always tell my students, because this concept of theory as being a problem in research, or something that you need to be afraid of, or something that you sort of, if I solve the theory, everything will be okay. I like to think about theory more as a warm, comfortable blanket that you can draw on top of all your chaotic empirical findings and make some sense into it. So theory helps for me to structure the discussion, or perhaps you could say the narrative. And when you work like with me, who's involved in the EU Kids Online Network, we have a lot of data, always. You could always find, hundreds of variables that could go into a model, or there's all kinds of elements. So there is a sort of a chaos. And being able to use theory to think about what can we choose? What would be the most relevant? How is this story going to look like? So also to make it helpful for the reader and for people who can understand the conclusions. And then perhaps once you've done that, you can add some new and interesting things into the mix to see what comes out. And maybe you could even contribute to some theoretical development and saying, hang on, there's another element we didn't think about. Or often theories also are not intended to be used on this field, children and media. They come from other fields. So testing theories with our type of concepts and data and empirical work is fantastic, I think. And that also helps making us generally as media researchers more relevant. I think it's extremely important to both to explain theory and why we use it, and also to use it when we disseminate, because if we're theory driven in our research, which we often are, we have this, it's sort of always this underlying comfortable blanket of what we should do or not do. Other people might not understand, why did you do it this way? Apart from the methods, why are you looking at these concepts rather than these concepts? And there's always a practitioner or two in the audience who will raise their hand and say, yeah, but from, you know, in my practical experience, and then they will bring up some new element that is not something you've researched. And using theory to explain that this is a lens. The theory helps us create a lens to look at things. And we can widen the lens or we can make it more narrow, but it's still a lens. We cannot see the full picture. We can never see the full picture, but we can, it's like a puzzle, and we can bring some pieces to the full picture. And I think that together with Sonia Livingston and Giovanna Massaroni, we made an attempt to sort of synthesize some of the insights we had from EU Kids Online into what we call the theoretical analytical model. And that model for me has been extremely helpful when talking to people outside the academic world, like policymakers or educators, because I can point to the model. The model consists of 3 levels, and you can show how individual level variables, what happens within the child, for instance, and all these things that are individual, like gender and age and personalities and experiences, how these are interlinked with the social level, family situation, school situation, peer situation, what you do online, and then with the national level. And when I try to explain our research, I start often by showing this model, and people might think it's complicated, but once you explain that there are different ways of looking at things through the child, through the social relations with the child, or through the wider societal, then people get it. And then I can go back to the model and say, this is something we found, but remember, for this question, we only looked at the child. So we don't know what's going on in the family. Or for this question, we looked at what's going in the family, but we didn't look at the country. So, and variables, and people get that. So for me, theory is helpful to explain why we're doing what we're doing and why we cannot answer all questions. Like I said before, I think that theory can be used as this warm, comfortable blanket that you can sort of help you, but theory can also be used as a pacifier. And I think that maybe, and very crudely and honestly speaking on myself, I think that this, what is generally known as the new sociology of childhood, has become sort of a pacifier, just saying that we are paying attention to children's agency and we're in this field. And I'm thinking maybe we could frame and work on this further. First of all, could we still call it a new sociology of childhood when it's, you know, decades and decades old? And should we still talk about new media, as we still do, although, you know, it is children who started using internet when they were kids are now actually adults. So is it new, or is it just that we that are old? So I think that maybe we could try to qualify something into having been new into being established and see what we can do with it further, if that makes sense. So this new sociology of childhood, I would like to see what would the future sociology of childhood look like, for instance. And then of course, as a media scholar, I will always say context. We should always work with context. Context is king in my world. So that would be my sort of, that if everybody would look at context, I would be happy. I would read lots and lots of research. Okay, so key highlights, 3 things. Theory is your friend. Don't be afraid of theory. Number 2, don't be in abusive relationships with your theory. You're not married to it. Use a lot of them. And finally, context is king.